The Long Road Home. The morning sun broke over the rough country like a promise, casting long shadows across the canyon, where Cornelius Blackwood's ambitions had finally shattered against the rocks. James Mackenzie stood beside the makeshift stretcher where Blackwood lay unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. Sergeant Morrison crouched nearby, checking the bindings that secured the injured man. "He may not make it to Medicine Hat," Morrison said quietly, his weathered face grave. "That's a bad break in his leg, and there's likely internal bleeding." James felt Eleanor's presence beside him before she spoke. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally despite the exhaustion that weighed on them both. "Then we ride quickly," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the dark circles under her eyes. "He should face justice if possible. The community deserves to see that the law works, even out here." Morrison nodded, respect clear in his expression. "Your wife's got steel in her spine, Mackenzie. You're a fortunate man." "I'm learning that," James replied, squeezing Eleanor's hand, "though I've been slow about it." Eleanor met his gaze, and something passed between them, an understanding that would need words later, in privacy, but for now existed as a shared acknowledgement of change. They had both ridden through fire these past weeks, separately and together, and neither would emerge unchanged. Daniel Thornton approached, his left arm bound in a makeshift sling where a bullet had grazed him during the gunfight. Despite the injury, his step was light, his eyes bright. "Constable Williams and I will ride ahead to Medicine Hat," Daniel said. "Someone needs to warn the town and fetch Doc Harrison. And," he paused, color rising in his cheeks, "I should check on Sarah. Your daughter, Mrs. Mackenzie. She'll be worried." Eleanor's tired face softened into something approaching a smile. "She will be. Thank you, Daniel, for everything." "Your son saved my life in that canyon," James added, extending his hand. "I won't forget it." Daniel shook firmly, meeting James's eyes with quiet confidence. "Sarah saved mine first, sir. I reckon we're all bound together now, one way or another." As Daniel and Constable Williams prepared to ride, Samuel Thornton gathered the reins of his own horse. "I'll head back to my place, James. Make sure the women know everyone's safe, then check on young Thomas at your homestead. Mary Campbell's good folk, but the boy will want news of his parents. Tell him we're coming home," Eleanor said. "Tell him we're all coming home together." The words hung in the morning air like a benediction. Samuel nodded, understanding more than was said, and rode north toward the scattered homesteads that had become something more than neighbors in these dangerous days, a community forged in shared struggle. The ride to Medicine Hat took the better part of the day. Blackwood drifted in and out of consciousness on the stretcher, sometimes moaning, sometimes muttering fragments that might have been prayers or curses. James found himself unable to hate the broken man as thoroughly as he'd expected. Blackwood had murdered, schemed, and nearly destroyed the Mackenzie family, yet lying there shattered and dying, he seemed less a monster than a cautionary tale. A man who'd let greed consume everything else until nothing remained but ashes. "What are you thinking?" Eleanor asked during one of their brief rest stops. They sat slightly apart from the others, sharing water and hardtack while the horses grazed. "That it could have been me," James admitted. "Not the murder, but the obsession. The pride. I was so determined to prove I could make this work alone, to show everyone back in Ontario that I didn't need help or community or..." He trailed off, meeting her eyes. "Or my wife's counsel." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, studying the horizon where heat shimmer made the distant prairie dance. "You weren't wrong to want to prove yourself, James. I understood that even when it frustrated me, but you were wrong to think proving yourself meant doing it alone. I know that now." He reached for her hand again, marveling at how natural the gesture had become in just these few hours. "When I thought Blackwood's men might have killed you and Sarah, when I rode toward home not knowing if you were alive or dead. Eleanor, I would have traded this entire claim, the mine, everything, just to see you safe." "But you don't have to trade anything," she said gently. "That's what I'm trying to tell you. We can have the homestead and each other. We can build something here and still be a family. We just have to do it together." "Together," James repeated, tasting the word like something new. "No more secrets, no more decisions made in isolation." No more riding off to town without telling me why, Eleanor added with a slight smile. And no more me investigating mysterious minds without telling you. That seems fair. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Sergeant Morrison check Blackwood's bindings once more. The man's breathing had grown more labored, his face gray beneath the dust and sweat. "Do you think he'll survive?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know. Part of me hopes he does, so he can answer for what he did to William Garrett. So the Henderson family can know justice was done." James paused. "But another part thinks maybe this is justice enough. Broken and dying in the dirt, his empire collapsed, his secrets exposed. Sometimes God's judgment comes swifter than the law's." "Either way, it's over," Eleanor said. "That chapter, at least. And the next one begins." She leaned against his shoulder, and they sat that way until Morrison called for them to mount up again. Medicine Hat appeared on the horizon in late afternoon, its scattered buildings and single main street looking both smaller and more welcoming than James remembered from just days ago. Word of their approach had already spread. Daniel and Constable Williams had done their work well. A crowd gathered near the doctor's office as the patrol rode in with their prisoner. Doc Harrison, a spare man with quick hands and kind eyes, directed them to carry Blackwood into his surgery. "I'll do what I can, but I make no promises." That's a badly broken man. As they carried the stretcher inside, James saw faces in the crowd he recognized. Merchants, fellow homesteaders, townspeople who'd done business with Blackwood over the years. Some looked shocked, others grimly satisfied. Mrs. Chen from the general store met his eyes and nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd long suspected. But it was another face that caught James's attention. Marcus Brennan, the banker, standing near the back of the crowd with an unreadable expression. Sergeant Morrison noticed James's focus. "We'll need to speak with Brennan about Blackwood's financial affairs. There's the matter of your debt, among other things." "The 30 days aren't up yet," James said automatically, then caught himself. "Though I suppose circumstances have changed." "More than you know," Morrison replied. "Blackwood held notes on half the homesteads in this district. If he dies, those debts become part of his estate. And if his estate is seized as proceeds of crime, it'll be a legal tangle that takes months to sort." Eleanor stepped closer. "But we have proof of our claim to the land, regardless of Blackwood's schemes. The mine was on our property. William Garrett's letter establishes that Blackwood had no legal right to it." "That's for the courts to decide, ma'am, but I'd say you have a strong case." Morrison touched his hat brim respectfully. "I'll need you both to come to Fort Walsh in the next week to give formal statements. Bring that letter and any other evidence you have. We'll build a case that'll stand up in Regina if necessary." "We'll be there," James promised. As the crowd began to disperse, Daniel Thornton emerged from the general store, leading a fresh horse. His injured arm was properly bandaged now, and he'd cleaned up some, though exhaustion still lined his young face. "Sarah's still at our place," he reported. "Mother sent word with Peter Reed. She's recovering well, though she's worried sick about all of you." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm riding back there now. Thought you'd want to know she's safe." "Ride careful," Eleanor said warmly. "And Daniel, tell her we'll be home by tomorrow evening. All of us together." Daniel's face lit with a smile that spoke volumes about his feelings, and James found he didn't mind nearly as much as he might have a week ago. The young man had proven himself loyal and brave, and if Sarah's heart was inclined in that direction, well, there were worse foundations for a match than mutual respect earned through shared danger. After Daniel rode out, James and Eleanor found themselves at loose ends in a town that suddenly felt foreign despite its familiarity. They'd been so focused on survival, on reaching the law, on stopping Blackwood, that the prospect of simply existing in normal time felt strange. "We should find lodging," Eleanor said practically. "The boarding house, perhaps. A real bed would be welcome." "And a bath," James agreed, suddenly aware of how thoroughly coated in trail dust he was. "Then food that isn't hardtack." They walked together down the main street, past the land office where Blackwood had held court, past the saloon where his influence had reached, past the shops and businesses that had operated in the shadow of his schemes. James wondered how many others had known or suspected what Blackwood was doing. How many had benefited from looking the other way? It changes how you see a place, Eleanor murmured, echoing his thoughts, knowing what was hidden beneath the surface. Everything looks different now, James agreed, but maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe seeing clearly is the first step toward building something better. They secured a room at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, a clean establishment run by a widow who asked no questions beyond whether they wanted supper sent up. The room was small but comfortable, with a real bed covered in a wedding ring quilt and a washstand with a porcelain pitcher. Eleanor sank into the single chair with a sigh that seemed to come from her bones. James, I need to say something before we go any further. He paused in the act of pouring water into the basin, hearing the serious note in her voice. All right. These past 3 years have been hard, harder than I expected when we left Ontario. I knew there would be work and weather and isolation, but I didn't expect. She searched for words. I didn't expect to feel so alone, even when you were right there beside me. The words stung, but James forced himself to listen, to really hear what she was saying. You built walls around yourself, Eleanor continued, her voice steady but her eyes bright with emotion. You stopped talking to me about your worries, your plans, your fears. You made decisions that affected all of us without asking my thoughts. And I let it happen for too long. I told myself you needed to feel in control, that challenging you would only make things worse. But that was wrong of me too. Eleanor, please, let me finish. She stood, crossing to stand before him. I love you, James. I've loved you since we were young and foolish in Ontario, and I love you now even when we're older and should know better. But I can't live the next 30 years the way we've lived the last 3. I need to be your partner, not just your helpmate. I need you to trust me with the hard truths, not just the easy ones. James set down the pitcher carefully, his throat tight. You're right, about all of it. I did build walls, and I told myself it was to protect you from worry. But really, it was pride. Stubborn, foolish pride. I thought if I admitted I was struggling, if I asked for help, it meant I'd failed. But you haven't failed, Eleanor said, reaching for his hands. We're still here. We're still standing. The homestead is still ours. And now we have a chance at something more than just survival. We have a chance at prosperity, but only if we face it together. Together, James repeated. And this time the word felt like a vow being renewed. No more walls, no more secrets. I promise you, Eleanor, whatever comes next, we decide it together. She stepped into his embrace, and they stood that way for a long moment, holding each other while the afternoon sun slanted through the window and the sounds of Medicine Hat filtered up from the street below. It wasn't a magical transformation, James knew. Years of habit wouldn't disappear overnight. But it was a beginning, a foundation they could build on. Tomorrow we go home, Eleanor said softly against his chest. We see Thomas and Sarah. We start putting the pieces back together. And the mine? James asked. The silver? That's a conversation for the whole family, Eleanor replied, pulling back to look at him with a slight smile. See, already I'm teaching you to share decisions. Despite everything, the exhaustion, the worry, the weight of all that had happened, James found himself laughing. It felt good, that laughter, like something rusty finally loosening. That evening, after a supper of roast beef and potatoes that tasted like heaven after days of trail food, James and Eleanor walked the quiet streets of Medicine Hat. The sun was setting, painting the prairie sky in shades of orange and purple that took the breath away even after 3 years of seeing such displays. They found themselves outside the land office, now dark and locked. Through the window, James could see the maps on the wall, the filing cabinets full of claims and deeds and dreams. I came here 3 years ago, so full of hope, he said quietly. I was going to build an empire, prove to everyone back home that I was more than just another Ontario farm boy. And instead, you built a home, Eleanor said. You built a family that stayed together through drought and debt and danger. That's not nothing, James. No, he agreed. It's not nothing. They turned away from the land office and walked toward the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open prairie. In the distance, James could see the dark line of the coulees where Blackwood had made his last stand, and beyond that, invisible in the gathering dusk, their homestead waited. "What do you think will happen to all the families who owed Blackwood money?" Eleanor asked. "I don't know. Morrison says it'll be tangled up in courts for months. But if Blackwood's estate is seized, maybe those debts will be forgiven. Maybe a lot of families will get a fresh start. Including us." "Including us," James confirmed. "Though I'd rather pay our debt honestly if we can. The mine silver should make that possible, once we can legally claim it." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need to hire a lawyer, someone from Calgary or Regina who knows mining law. This is too important to leave to chance." "See?" James said with a smile. "Already thinking 3 steps ahead. This is why I need you, Eleanor Mackenzie." "You need me because I'm brilliant and beautiful," she replied tartly, but her eyes were warm. "The strategic thinking is just a bonus." They stood together as the stars began to emerge, bright and clear in the prairie sky. Somewhere out there, Thomas was waiting for them. Sarah was recovering, probably driving Martha Thornton to distraction with her impatience. Daniel was riding through the night to bring her news. Samuel was checking on their homestead, keeping watch over what they'd built. Community, James thought. That's what they'd found in the midst of all this struggle. Not just neighbors, but people bound together by shared hardship and mutual support. People who'd stood with them when it would have been easier and safer to stand aside. "Tomorrow," Eleanor said, as if reading his thoughts, "we start thanking people properly. The Thorntons, the Campbells, the Reeds, everyone who helped us. And we start planning," James added, "for the mine, for the harvest, for the future. All of it together." "Together," Eleanor echoed. They walked back to the boarding house, hand in hand, and for the first time in months, maybe years, James felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. Peace. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of hope grounded in partnership. In Doc Harrison's surgery, Cornelius Blackwood opened his eyes in the darkness. Pain radiated through his broken body in waves, and he could taste blood in his mouth. The room swam in and out of focus, shadows dancing at the edges of his vision. He tried to move and gasped at the agony that shot through his leg. Broken, he remembered. The horse falling, the rocks rushing up, the sickening impact. And before that, the gunfire, the chase, the moment when everything he built had collapsed like a house of cards. The door opened, spilling lamplight across the floor. Doc Harrison entered, carrying a tray with bandages and medicine bottles. "You're awake," the doctor said neutrally. "That's something, at least." "How bad?" Blackwood's voice came out as a rasp. "Bad enough. Broken leg, cracked ribs, internal bleeding I can't do much about. You might make it, or you might not. I've seen men survive worse, and I've seen men die from less." Blackwood closed his eyes. 6 years he kept the secret of William Garrett's death. 6 years of careful planning, strategic land purchases, building influence and power. And it had all come apart because of one stubborn family and a letter that should have burned with the mine shaft. "The Mackenzies," he whispered. Are they?" "They're fine," Harrison said shortly. "No thanks to you. Now lie still while I check these bandages." As the doctor worked, Blackwood felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine fear. Not of death. He'd made his peace with that possibility long ago. But fear of dying with his sins unabsolved, with the weight of William Garrett's murder dragging him down into whatever came after. "I need," he started, then stopped. What did he need? A priest? A lawyer? Forgiveness from people who had every right to hate him? "What you need is rest," Harrison said, finishing with the bandages. "And prayer, if you're the praying sort. I'll check on you in a few hours." The doctor left, and Blackwood was alone again with his pain and his regrets. Somewhere in this town, James and Eleanor Mackenzie were sleeping peacefully, their family intact, their future secured by the very mine he'd killed to possess. Justice, he thought bitterly. Or perhaps just the way of things. The proud brought low, the meek inheriting the earth. He'd read those words in his mother's Bible long ago, before ambition had burned away whatever faith he'd possessed. Now, lying broken in the darkness, Cornelius Blackwood finally understood what those words meant. But understanding came too late.